Hi, everybody. I wanted to come on and share. I know it's been a little while, and yeah, I've been under the weather, and so taking some time to rest. And finally, I'm starting to feel like I'm coming up and out of the depths of hell. And so today I had major stuff coming in, and I just had a few hours to be with it and marinate with it. And I just wanted to share on the topic of giving and receiving, and how giving and receiving in a very healthy dynamic is so different than the dynamic of the giver and the taker. So I wanted to talk about that today. And I also wanted to talk about the dark side of psychology, which it's so interesting. Psychology is something that I really do think that everybody needs to learn, at least the basics, because the current powers that be really know how they know psychology, and they know how to psychologically manipulate us. Many of us are aware of this, even at a very superficial level in terms of advertising. Like we know this. Sometimes we forget, people forget all the time. But psychological warfare, in terms of how it's actually creating the unhealthy pairing of the giver and the taker, is something I wanted to talk about today too. And so um, we are psychologically programmed to either love ourselves to the point of grandiosity, or you could say narcissism. And that's actually the dial for that has really been turned up the last like 10 years or so. And there is a real truth to narcissism. I'm going to talk about that today. But there's also this other side, this other kind of polar opposite thing where there's definitely self-hatred programming, and there has been for a long time. Even just look at advertising, and that's one very like um, it's a almost benign form of programming compared to some of what I'm thinking about. But programming teaches us that we're not good enough. We're not, I'm laughing because I showed my son the Stuart Smalley videos the other day, and so I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people like me. And so advertising teaches us that we are not good enough. We're not smart enough, and people don't like us unless we have X, Y, and Z. And so there's definitely self-hatred programming, right? That forms people that really do have low levels of self-love, self-worth, self-esteem, whatever you want to call that, right? And what's crazy is that those people actually end up being, when I talk about the giver and the taker dynamic, those people end up being the givers. But this is where I'll get into like a little bit more detail here. And the other side, right? People who maybe have been trained to be narcissistic, entitled, think that they're better or more special than everybody, end up being the takers. And so you can see that this is actually very strategically programmed into us. And this is one of many manifestations of division of people into two camps that are actually these pairings that are very unhealthy and dysfunctional. And so the misery that is created in these kind of exchanges feeds the bigger thing here at play, the matrix control system. So you can see that the self-hatred programming that is really directed at us in many different ways, from media, from TV, from certainly advertising, but also through trauma, through abuse, and even like the more covert ways that it's programmed into us. Like I work with a lot of people who, as children, they were parentified, for example, and so they were taught that they had to put their needs to the side because everyone else's needs were more important than theirs. And so that was a survival strategy, obviously, in childhood. That is a form of self-hatred programming, which is very much on a spectrum. I know that it's very kind of dramatic to say self-hatred programming, but I like to say it in that way because it really is that important for us to be able to ask ourselves, where is this running inside of us? Because ultimately, anything that erodes our ability to love ourselves in a very healthy way, I'm not talking about a narcissistic way, is actually divorces us and disconnects us from God. And the way that I see it energetically is that anything that erodes our self-love is it's eroding our energetic field. It's actually stealing life force energy from us. And so these people often have very dim, or you can see even in the body language, they're very like small. They make themselves small. So their energetic field, excuse me, becomes really, really small, because they don't have like that vibrancy. They don't have that, the radiance that comes from really owning your inner light. So there's so much here, but you can see that there's this creation of these two camps of people so that we can keep that giver and that taker thing going, right? Because this is a very dysfunctional dynamic and it is not, a higher level of relationships. It's really interesting because just think for a moment if you can feel into the difference just intuitively, between a really healthy relationship where there's one person that's giving, the other person is receiving, which is so different. Like the word receiving is so different than taking, isn't it? And so, like a healthy relationship where there's a giver and there's a receiver, this is how relationships are meant to be. You have one person that's giving, not because they're trying to like covertly get something, but they're giving from like the overflow of their heart to another person. Like they're not giving because they think they're supposed to, because they're unconsciously giving to get approval or like have the other person see them as valuable or any kind of covert manipulation. They're giving because they are happy, they're joyful, they love their life. They don't have a deficit. Maybe they're like showing up with an overflow and it's just bubbling out of them and they're just giving their love to people, right? And so that's a very different place than over giving because you feel you've been programmed to think that that's what you need to do to get love or attention. And then the receiving in that kind of relationship is like the person is receiving it joyfully and with an open heart, right? They don't have a difficulty receiving it, which a lot of people do have difficulty receiving, or maybe there's walls up or they don't trust or whatever. But this person is receiving it open-heartedly and they're grateful. And so there's in the exchange, it's just very life-giving on both sides. It's very generative. This is not an example of an extractive relationship, right? Versus the giver and the taker, which often you can even say empath narcissist. This happens quite a bit too, or a codependent relationship, right? Where one person who's over giving, or being like a martyr or self-sacrificing or rescuing the other people. These are classic codependent things. And you can see psychologically in terms of the psychological programming and the warfare that's happening is that there is a very intentional creation of these two camps so that this dysfunctional dynamic can continue. And so at the beginning of the codependency video that I know many of you watched, it's called The Trap of Codependency. It was 2.5 hours. It's on my website. Many people have watched it. I start out that presentation sharing that codependency programming is very intentional to keep people stuck in these dysfunctional dynamics. And so I just wanted to share a little bit to have you notice the difference between the giver and the taker relationships and also the giving and the receiving, which is really beautiful. And we're meant to like be in those kind of relationships. So I'm really curious to know, have you noticed, these two types of relationships? And what is the difference in terms of the feeling between both of them? I know that I personally have been involved in both types of relationships. And when I was younger, especially because of just trauma and abuse, and of course, programming on the bigger level, was definitely programmed to be the overgiver and to, get into those relationships, which the hardest pill for us to swallow is that we actually um, it's even cringy for me to say to this day, but like we have to own our side of it, of how we're unconsciously allowing it to happen, allowing ourselves to be taken from. I know it's people don't like to hear this, but it's was the number one most empowering thing in my life where I realized that my ability to truly develop healthy self-love, in addition to boundaries and even learning what that word means, was a huge part of not just protection against those types of relationships and people coming into my life, but also I believe on a level of soul evolution, those two things are part of our learning and our growth in terms of soul evolution. I really do. And so it's really hard for us to see on our side where we're allowing that to continue. And what's really interesting is that as you change and as you start to heal your levels of self-love and as you start to learn about boundaries, the people who are the takers do not like that. They don't like it. And they can start to get very agitated when we start to change. Sometimes they'll do funny things where maybe they try to get the dynamic to go back to the way it was. Sometimes they'll just leave, but they tend to get really agitated because those people also, it's kind of weird, but they also developed the strategy of taking from the other person and actually getting, it's really strange from an energetic perspective, but their food source is taking from people who maybe are weak or disempowered. There's a certain energy signature to that kind of dynamic. Whereas they almost, in the face of people who are really healed and emanating true self-love and are these beacons of light, right, and joy, like they almost don't want that type of energy. I'm so curious to know if any of you have noticed that. It's like they need it to be a certain energetic signature when they take. Like it needs to be tinged with almost like this suffering component, which is really, I hope that you understand what I'm saying here. It's a little bit more on the energetic level. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. It's really interesting when you start thinking about the energetics. So I think I'm going to start to wrap up. I'm still recovering from not feeling well, and yet this really wanted to come through. So what else do I want to say to wrap up today? I just wanted to talk about the difference between giving and receiving and that like really healthy, beautiful exchange versus the giver and the taker and how that is not a healthy dynamic. I wanted to speak about how programming, whether it's through trauma or through just the bigger sort of matrix media programming, can really program people very intentionally to either really not love themselves and stay really small and disempowered and disconnected from the truth of who they are, or they can program people to be grandiose and think that they're better than other people. Sometimes it can even be inside of one person. You can have parts that maybe are both, and then there's this internal war, of course. And we all know the inner critic as well. And so that can be vicious. I've had some clients who have that so strongly. And so that's what I really have to teach them about self-hatred programming and how, ultimately the healing of that and the starting to really transmute the inner critic is actually a spiritual path. And so this is kind of where I'm going to end because we're not meant to hate ourselves, right? We're also not meant to think that we're better than other people. So the spiritual path here and the reason why coming back to self-love is actually coming back to an understanding of your connection to source is because we start to realize that we are divine expressions. We're all unique, beautiful, divine expressions of the Creator in our own way. And everyone is. And so no one person is better than the other. We all have these beautiful, unique gifts. So it's this beautiful third way to look at it. It's not that we have to be really small and overly humble. And it's also not that we're better than everybody else. And so it's a deep spiritual path, and it's a return to loving ourselves, which then opens our heart to be able to then connect with something higher. It's a big deal. I don't have all of the time to get into it, but I'm so curious to know, like, did anything in this video land for you, right? Like, have you experienced the giver taker dynamic? Have you experienced the beautiful, healthy giving and receiving dynamic? Can you tell the difference between those two things? And I feel like once we realize some of these patterns, some of these dynamics, and also how, the powers that be really want to keep us stuck. They want to keep us stuck. When I think about things like codependency, dysfunctional relationships, trauma, and all of these things, they're cutting us off from being able to really fully actualize our potential. And even within the realm of relationships, what I know is possible, even just through my work with clients, and how we can heal and how we can have incredible relationships. There's so much that's possible when we just do the work that we know is in front of us, right? And that's why I get really excited to teach about relationships in this path and all of the different, like, the realm of possibility is so big when you start to tap into what is possible with this work. When we think about freeing ourselves from codependency, when we think about truly developing secure, healthy attachment, and when we think about starting to work with relationships in a way that is truly conscious, because they're here for our growth, they're here for our evolution. There's, like, the sky is the limit, and we're really just tapping what is the phrase? We're just scratching the surface when it comes to what's possible in relationships. And so this is my passion, and this is what I teach, talk about all day long, work with people. So I would love to hear any comments or questions that you have on this video. I'm teaching a free class, depending on when you listen to this video, teaching a free class on February 3rd. It's called The Path to Union. I will put the link in the description. And otherwise, you can reach out to me. You can comment with any questions, and much love, everybody.